Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to SciFrights, the film discussion podcast from the interzone where horror meets science fiction. My name is Liam Dunn, and I'm a screenwriter, film critic, and a lifelong science fiction fan.
My name is Dr. Lindsay Hallam, and I am the course leader of the Film and Screen Studies degree at the University of the Arts London, who specialises in horror cinema.
And we are in fact partners both in life and in crime, and we are die-hard film fanatics.
In today's episode, we discuss Danny Boyle, a director who has been working steadily across many genres, with his most recent film 28 Years Later making it very high on our Best of 2025 list.
So today we are going back to where it all began with the low-res digital frenzy of 28 Days Later from 2002. Plus, we will discuss his one foray into science fiction, the psychological solar thriller Sunshine from 2007.
And just a reminder to everyone out there, we are going to spoil the hell out of these films. So if you want to watch these films first, please go ahead and we'll be here when you get back.
And we are extremely excited to welcome another fantastic guest to the show to discuss the work of Danny Boyle. That is podcaster extraordinaire and host of Evolution of Horror, Mike Muncer.
So how have you been? You always seem to be doing so many different things.
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, I'm always trying to keep myself busy. What am I up to at the moment? I've finished a book. So the book is coming out in July, which is like a book of the podcast, basically, which is exciting. And other than that, just like the usual stuff, really. But coming to the end of this big sci-fi horror season that I've been doing, actually. So it'll be nice to have a little break for a little bit. Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of being on Evolution of Horror a couple of times now. Both just a really big fan of the podcast anyway, before I even got to be able to be on. So can you just tell us how you actually got started with the podcast and kind of, I guess, really what got you into horror in the first place?
Yeah, of course. Well, thank you for having me on, by the way. And I've been into horror for as long as I can remember, really. I think even as a kid, some of the sort of films that I was watching always had that element of kind of horror in them, and I remember one of my very first ever cinema experiences was Jurassic Park, and that film I was only 6 years old when Jurassic Park came out, and that kind of simultaneously sort of absolutely terrified me, but also completely thrilled me. I had that experience of like almost being too scared to stay in my seat in the cinema, but at the same time not wanting to leave, and I think I've kind of had that ever since. I often talk about Michael Jackson's music video for Thriller being like a massive influence for me. Like I became kind of obsessed with it. I had it on VHS, and it wasn't just the music video itself, but like the making of documentary and the monster makeup and them talking about movies like American Werewolf in London and stuff. And I was kind of obsessed by that as well. So that kind of, grew. And then my first like genuine horror film experience was Scream, Wes Craven's Scream, when I would have been about 10 years old. And I just fell in love with it, completely fell in love with it. And then from that point onwards, I kind of set myself the task of kind of watching as many horror films as I could possibly find as a teenager. So it's kind of always been my sort of lifelong love and passion, really, horror cinema. And as I grew into kind of adulthood and I started working in sort of TV production, and I worked in kind of arts review programs and that kind of stuff for the BBC, sort of on the production side of it. And I was always kind of a bit sad that horror was never really given a chance to shine. Like horror was never really covered in kind of film criticism on TV or radio in the way that other genres were. And you didn't get as many documentaries about horror as you did other things. And so I decided I would just start a podcast in my spare time, because at that point, this was nearly a decade ago, this was like 2017, there certainly weren't as many horror podcasts, and there weren't really as many film podcasts as there are now. And so I was like, well, I'll just make something that I think, I would like to hear, I guess, really, which is like me with various different kind of critics and experts talking about kind of the history of horror cinema. So yeah, that's sort of how it started. And it was genuinely just like a little thing on the side, a little hobby that I did for fun. And then it just kind of grew and grew. And now it's my sort of full-time job. So yeah, it's been a bit of a dream journey, really. Yeah.
It's funny you talk about Jurassic Park, because that was a very formative film for me as well. And I think I remember going to the cinema like 3-4 times to see it and could never get through the Dilophosaurus killing Nedry scene. I would always hide, but then I would go back and see it again and be like, this time I'll watch it. And I just didn't. And then I know eventually I did, but
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's something about that scene, isn't there? That was the scene that traumatized me as well. I got through like the T-Rex attacking the children in the car. I got through the velociraptors in the kitchen at the end. It was something about that Dilophosaurus scene that it made me. I was 6 years old and I like burst into tears in that scene. My parents were like, "Do you want to go?" And I was like, "No!" Like I still wanted to stay and watch it, you know.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, genuinely terrifying that scene. Yeah.
And it's weird because for me, it was the Michael Jackson Thriller video. So it's weird that you hit both.
Yeah, I remember us talking about that on my podcast, Lindsay, as well. We have very similar kind of origin story, and we have very similar tastes too. Because for me, it's David Lynch, Fire Walk with Me, one of my favorite films of all time, and so I know we've got a lot of parallels with that kind of thing. Yeah,
there must be these kind of almost sacred texts that somehow unlock if you watch them.
Yeah.
At the right age.
For sure.
It just rewires the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've been doing the podcast since 2017. So the latest season that you did on kind of man-made monsters, that wasn't the 10th season, was that? Or 11th?
That was the 11th now, actually. Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So the podcast is kind of split into different seasons covering different kind of categories or subgenres of horror. And yeah, this latest one that I'm just coming to the end of is what I've called Man-Made Monsters, but it's been a broadly kind of sci-fi horror series. So we've talked about everything from kind of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to kind of killer robot films like The Terminator to Stepford Wives, Demon Seed to Blade Runner, which I talked about with you, Lindsay, and all the way up until kind of recent movies, sci-fi sort of horror stories like Poor Things and The Substance as well. So it's kind of been a whole series of kind of man messing with science, I suppose, and causing all kinds of unspeakable horrors. Yeah.
So basically, your last season is kind of what we focus on.
Yeah.
This podcast. Yeah. So I'd really love to know, because you've basically coming to the end of that season. So I would love to know, like, what kind of insights you've got about science fiction and horror. Like, where do they cross over and where do you think they diverge?
They're so similar in so many ways. And actually, when you look at some of the films I've talked about this season, it's almost impossible to decipher, actually, the two. Like, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the novel, that feels like the kind of origin point for both genres in a way, right? This story about this man playing God, messing with science and creating this monster. And in some ways, that is the most influential text in kind of sci-fi, but also in Gothic horror, right? So it's really interesting that these two genres kind of, they start from almost the same place, really, and then they kind of grow apart, but they sort of remain parallel throughout. And I think what's been really interesting is I've looked at the way in which I suppose humanity's kind of fears and anxieties have changed from decade to decade and how that gets reflected in horror. But so often that is also about whatever is happening in science and technology at the time, right? So whether it is like the nuclear bomb and, the kind of atomic age of the 40s and 50s to kind of robots and AI and everything like that from the sort of 60s and 70s through to all the way now. And we're getting obviously stories way more about kind of the sort of the online world, internet horror, screen life, but also AI as well and everything. So they've kind of gone hand in hand in terms of our fears and our anxieties. I guess sci-fi explores the actual ins and outs of the science a little bit more, maybe, and horror plays more on the fears and the consequences of it. And that's something that's really interesting, actually, when rereading Frankenstein and talking about it, is that even though it is obviously this kind of sci-fi text, there's actually so little attention paid to the science itself in that. It's kind of very like glossed over, like he assembled some bodies and did some things and then he created life, essentially, right? It's almost less about that. It's more about the kind of philosophical and ethical kind of consequences, right, of what he did. And so I think, again, there's something really interesting about that, because I kind of would always have assumed that science fiction kind of deals more overtly with the intricacies of the science. And some of those movies do, but actually Frankenstein doesn't so much. So there's so much crossover. There's so much blurring. They all deal with the kind of the consequences of humanity messing with stuff that maybe they shouldn't, essentially. But I guess horror plays a little bit more into those consequences than like classic sci-fi.
For me, it always seems like horror is more interested in the morality almost. And the science, it goes back to Jurassic Park. You know, it's not just if we could, but if we should.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like science fiction is maybe if we could, and the horror is maybe more if we should. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But again, I think even sci-fi does lead us back to that actually a lot of the time, and I suppose it depends as well how you want to define what is sci-fi and what is horror, and that is such a blurry line anyway. Like Lindsay, we've talked about Blade Runner together on my horror podcast, and people wouldn't call that, you know, horror as such in the kind of traditional sense, but I think we both mentioned about how there is a lot of horror in that, and there's a lot of body horror, and there's almost kind of like gothic horror elements to the way that film looks and sounds as well. So sometimes the horror side of things can just be a kind of stylistic element or a tonal element in a way, and then sci-fi is playing with the ideas, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely that kind of philosophy versus morality. I always think of like the sci-fi. Yeah, it wants you to sit back and think about the grand scheme of what's going on, like the ideas at play. But the horror film, like, it's almost like boots on the ground. Like, this is what's happening to you, or what's happening to the personal, like the personal aspect of it. What does it have an effect on the body, on the mind, on the person themselves?
For sure, yeah. I mean, even if you look at, like, for example, the film we're about to talk about, 28 Days Later, it's like, if there was just a pure sci-fi version of that, it might have concentrated more on what we see in the opening scene, which is what is this rage virus and how is it developed and why was it developed and everything. But this is a horror movie. It kind of sets that up in the first 5 minutes, and then it's done with it. And now we get on to the consequences of what's happened, right? Yeah.
So before this season, were you interested in science fiction? Is it something that you were always watching, or are you just more like diehard horror?
Yeah, no, I do love sci-fi, and I've you know, again, sci-fi is so broad, isn't it? And I think there were elements of sci-fi that I've never liked so much that I personally wouldn't have I would consider less sci-fi, but people would consider them sci-fi. So, for example, I've never really loved the Star Wars movies. And to me, there's something about those movies that, you know, apart from the fact that they're set in space and they're about and they've got spaceships and lasers and things, they don't actually feel that sci-fi to me. They feel more like these kind of fantasy adventures, right? Whereas I was always more on the Star Trek side than the Star Wars side. Like, I like sci-fi that has kind of big existential ideas. One of my favorite films is 2001: A Space Odyssey. I love the movies of Alex Garland, Ex Machina, Annihilation. You know, I love movies that kind of deal with, you know, I love Black Mirror. It's one of my favorite TV shows. So I have always loved sci-fi, and I've loved the kind of philosophical, thought-provoking sci-fi that kind of leaves you with those big ideas. And I suppose for me, the sweet spot is where it crosses over with horror as well. So again, 2001, I think that film is such a masterpiece because it is so dense with ideas and sort of philosophy, but also there is something genuinely really unnerving about it too. There is this kind of real sense of dread throughout that movie that I've always really loved, you know? So yeah, I've always loved sci-fi. And again, if we're going to count Jurassic Park as sci-fi, which it kind of is, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. So yeah.
And so we move on to where you mentioned loving the films of Alex Garland. And what did you say yesterday, Liam, that this episode is kind of
it's a sneaky Alex Garland double bill as well, because he wrote both these films, and a Cillian Murphy double as well. So we're kind of getting a triple threat.
The triple double.
3 for the price of 1.
Yeah. So why did you choose Danny Boyle?
I've always loved Danny Boyle. Like he's always been one of those directors for me. And there are relatively few directors, I would say, where I will go watch the new movie by this person no matter what it is. You know, there's a handful. We've all got our favorite filmmakers. Danny Boyle, for me, has always been up there. He's always been like, oh, there's a new Danny Boyle movie. I should go and see it. It's always a bit of an event for me. And maybe it's because when I was a teenager, I completely fell in love with Trainspotting and Shallow Grave, those two early movies that I just thought were so like unbelievably vibrant and energetic and kinetic and fun, but they're also really dark and twisted, and I kind of love that about Boyle's work. Like, he has a sensibility that for me really works, which is this mix of kind of dealing with really dark, nasty subject matter, often quite bleak subject matter, but doing it in a way that feels kind of energetic and fun and almost kind of pop music sensibility, right? And for some people, I think that style can get a bit annoying. I've always quite enjoyed that about his work, that he kind of really like plays with cinema and the technology of cinema and the form of cinema to kind of tell a story in a really kind of unique, interesting way. And he's kind of done that with various different genres, you know?
Have you been there kind of from the beginning? So his first film comes out in 94. And I remember, because definitely for me, I think Shallow Grave would have been the first film I would have seen of his. Because that was kind of, it was very like all the 90s, I don't know, kind of indie films and stuff. It all seemed very much in that. And then Trainspotting was so huge. I remember that because that was rated R in Australia, which is like an 18 certificate here. So, and I think it was just before I was 18 that it comes out. I had to wait until video to be able to see it. But you, Liam, have you been there from the beginning?
Well, yeah, I think I was a few years after Trainspotting came out that I got to see it. I remember the marketing for that film just being everywhere. I remember my sister had the poster on her wall, you know, where you'd had each of the characters and that with the assigned number and the orange on white thing. And I remember hearing a bit of the soundtrack and stuff. And then in high school, I had a friend who was really into it as well. And I read the book, or tried to read the book, because it's all written in the Scottish parlance, which was very difficult for me as a teenager to get through. But I read the book and really got into the film. But it was obviously years after it. I guess I would have watched it on video. And then I sought out like Shallow Grave after that, and it was like, oh, this is from the same director as Trainspotting, and then from there it's like, I think similarly to Mike, of like just try like being interested in anything that he did after that, especially after 28 Days Later.
You're a bit younger than us, so I guess as a teenager, what were the films that were coming out?
Yeah, so I guess it would have been kind of early 2000s when I actually first discovered. It was probably I think it was before 28 Days Later, which was 2002. So I was watching, probably too young, but I was watching Trainspotting probably around age 12, 13, probably around the very, very early 2000s or late 90s. So he, probably around the time of The Beach, actually. Like, I remember The Beach being quite a thing here in the UK. It was quite an event because it was Danny Boyle and we had the All Saints song and everything. And it was there was something about Danny Boyle that I found quite exciting as when I was young and as a teenager, because he always had these cool soundtracks and there was this kind of cool poppy sensibility, almost like he was our British Tarantino at the time, right? Like you had this mix of kind of violence and needle drops, and there was a kind of cool factor to it, right? And pop culture references and that kind of thing. So I remember like sort of being really interested in him and sort of reading about his movies and kind of hearing about them. And then, I finally, when I was able to watch Trainspotting, it blew my brains out. I loved it. I thought it was so gross and disturbing and upsetting, but also really kind of, again, that kind of vibrancy and that energy, and it really kind of it was part of that era when I was discovering people like Tarantino and the Coen brothers, and I was kind of really falling in love with cinema as a kind of young teen, I think. So Danny Boyle was very much part of that journey. And then I remember seeing 28 Days Later, and that was pretty much as soon as it came out on video here in the UK, and that was when I was a kind of burgeoning horror fan. So obviously I loved that movie, absolutely loved it. And then from that point onwards, I kind of made a point to see pretty much everything he's done. By the time Slumdog Millionaire and Sunshine were out, I was old enough to see those in the cinema, and then everything since, basically. And I've liked some of his movies less than others, but I think there's always something really interesting about him, isn't there? And I've also, since becoming a film journalist, I've gotten the chance to interview him a few times. I interviewed him for Steve Jobs and for T2 and for 28 Years Later last year for my podcast. And again, his own energy is kind of infectious. He's this very lovely, smiley, enthusiastic little pocket rocket of a guy. I feel like, and his kind of sensibility is reflected in his movies, I think. And it's funny actually seeing him. I interviewed him alongside Alex Garland, and Alex Garland is kind of the opposite. He's kind of he's a bit more serious and a bit more solemn and looks a little bit more tired and weary, but I think they sort of balance each other out quite well in that regard. I wonder if that's why they make such a good partnership,
But that's the thing is like you mentioned, he has such a distinct style. So he works across so many different genres. But yet, like you were saying, there's something recognizable.
Yeah.
But then also at the same time, he always works with very strong writers, like obviously Alex Garland several times, but then with Steve Jobs, that was written by Aaron Sorkin. And did Richard Curtis do Yesterday?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, I've not actually seen that. So he's working with these, like, some of the most recognizable screenwriters.
Yeah, I know. I think that's interesting, isn't it? I guess he's much more of a director than he is a writer, right? And he loves taking another person's script and making it his own. And the Steve Jobs is a really interesting comparison. If you compare Steve Jobs, which was written by Aaron Sorkin, to The Social Network, which was Fincher working with Sorkin, like they have such different vibes and sensibilities. And I think that is Danny Boyle bringing very much that kind of Danny Boyle-ness to anything he does. Yeah, and it's the same if you look at 28 years later compared to Bone Temple as well. Like there's something so different about what Danny Boyle does with that story compared to what Nia DaCosta does, just sort of visually and stylistically and tonally.
All right. Shall we get into 28 Days Later?
Let's do it.
Hello? Hello?
So who are you?
I wake up today in hospital. I wake up and I'm hallucinating.
I've got some bad news.
They're infected.
Infected!
Father.
Infected with what?
Oh, I shouldn't have done that.
The blood. There's something in the blood.
Lesson 1. You never go anywhere alone unless you've got no choice.
Hello?
Lesson 2. You only travel during daylight unless you've got no choice.
This really is a bad idea. You know why? It's obviously a bad idea.
We have to leave now. More will be coming. They always do.
They're dead. And you're gonna be next.
A group of animal rights activists break into a lab to document the experiments being done on chimpanzees, who are hooked up to monitors screening violent images. The activists are found by a doctor who tells them not to free the chimps as they are infected with rage. One of the chimps does escape and immediately attacks one of the activists, who is immediately infected and then attacks and passes the virus on to the others. 28 days later, bicycle courier Jim wakes up in a hospital bed. He roams around the deserted hospital onto the streets of London with no one to be found. He enters a church and sees a mass of corpses. He is then attacked by an infected priest and runs outside, where he is rescued by Selena and Martin, who tell him what has occurred. A virus has wiped out all of Britain. Jim insists on going to find his parents, but when they arrive, he finds them dead, and one of his neighbours, now infected, comes into the house and attacks them. Martin is bit, and Selena swiftly kills him before the infection takes hold. Jim and Selena go towards a light signal from a tower block, finding father and daughter Frank and Hannah. Frank shows them a radio signal from a blockade near Manchester that promises salvation from infection. They all decide to travel there, growing closer on their journey. Once they arrive, they find the blockade is deserted. In frustration, Frank kicks at a gate, and from above, an infected corpse drops blood onto Frank's eye, and he turns. Frank tells them to stay back when suddenly he is shot. A group of soldiers appear and take them to a nearby estate. The troop is headed by Major Henry West, who welcomes them to stay. The estate is heavily fortified, and they've chained up an infected soldier, Private Mailer, to see how long an infected takes to starve to death. West soon reveals to Jim that he promised his men that he would provide them with women, and Selena and Hannah are to be given to the men. Jim and one of the soldiers, Sergeant Farrell, object to this and are in prison. Farrell tells Jim that Britain has been quarantined and the outside world is free of the virus. The soldiers take Jim and Farrell out to the woods to kill them, but Jim escapes. Jim frees Mailer, who runs into the house and goes on a rampage, killing the soldiers. Jim enters the house in a similar frenzy to find Selena and Hannah. Once they get outside, they go to Frank's car, but West is inside and shoots Jim. Hannah drives the car in reverse, and Mailer enters the back of the car and kills West. 28 days later, Jim awakens. Selena and Hannah are outside in a house in the countryside, making a large sign saying hello as a plane flies overhead. You've mentioned already that you get to see 28 Days Later in the cinema. It was a go watch.
Yeah. I think I would have only been about 14 when this came out in 2002. So I was very much aware of it. And you know, I was devouring magazines like Empire at this point. And I remember very much wanting to see it, but I had to wait until it was out on video. And so I saw it late in 2002, probably on video, or maybe early 2003. And I remember finding particularly the first 45 minutes so unbelievably scary, and some of the best, scariest horror I think I'd ever seen at that point in my life. You know, like just the sheer kind of like breakneck pace of it. I'd never seen anything like it, really, and it's kind of heart-stopping terror, isn't it, in that first act? So yeah, I've kind of loved it since the moment I first saw it, really. And I think it's really interesting to watch now as such a little product of its time as well, you know.
I remember seeing it at the cinema. And I don't know why this ended up happening, but I ended up seeing with my mom and my mom's friend. So who I didn't really think were like big horror fans, but anyway, maybe they took pity on me and were like, oh yeah, we'll go to see one of these films that Lindsay likes. And I know, yeah, I remember seeing it in cinema and it was just so thrilling. In particular, for me, it's the scene where they're changing the tire in the tunnel.
Oh my God! And the rat.
Oh, and I think I remember my mom and her friend just
terrified,
letting out all these yelps. But I do think it probably was one of the first, like, shot on digital, that really early digital films that I would have seen in a cinema setting.
Yeah,
and I do remember it does really look very different. Although I had seen, when did Dancer in the Dark come out? That would have been before.
Yeah, was that 2000? Maybe just before? It was just before.
Yeah, because I'd seen that at the cinema, so I was aware of the Dogma stuff, but I didn't often get to see those at the cinema. So I feel like this is one of the first big cinema films that was using digital video, and it definitely. I can't imagine what it was been like a normal kind of film goer seeing it. They must have been quite shocked by it.
Well, it almost looks now like the technology, that camera quality is so bad. I talked about it with Danny Boyle last year. He was like, God, I don't know how I got away with it. He was like, it looked terrible. When you see it blown up on a big screen now, and, you know, Cillian Murphy is just like about 5 pixels, you know, as he walks across the Westminster Bridge. And it did look so different to anything we had seen before at that point. It almost looks like found footage, I think, now. It almost looks like it could be a movie like Blair Witch or something, in terms of how kind of grainy that digital kind of cinematography is. But of course, this was all done for practical reasons because of those incredible shots that they got around London, right? Where they had sort of half-hour window to kind of shoot Westminster Bridge while it was closed at sort of 5 a.m, just as the sun was rising, and they had this tiny little window, so they had to have a really small portable camera that they could run around with in London and get these shots that they needed. So part of it was just down to kind of those constraints of like, let's be as kind of portable and quick and accessible as we can with the equipment. And that was the stuff everyone talked about, even at the time, wasn't it? All of those shots of London. That was kind of like the big talking point of this movie.
Yeah, it's iconic because I think it's funny. Like, it's a couple of things you mentioned that I had in my notes is about, it feels, all that Westminster Bridge stuff, it feels captured. It doesn't feel like it's been staged. And I think that's the quality. The camera, for all of its graininess, gives you that feeling of like that you're actually there. And also, this kind of time capsule of kind of the early 2000s of London. Like I remember when he comes out of the hospital and they make a big deal of all the payphones. And it's like, where are payphones now? Nowhere. I mean, that's such a kind of artifact. But yeah, just that feeling of emptiness and of this, that it doesn't feel like there is a whole bunch of traffic just behind the camera or waiting to come through into the city. It just feels, you feel that emptiness so palpably.
Yeah. Yeah, completely.
William, when did you first see this film?
I think I saw it at the cinema as well when it came out, and it just looked like nothing else I'd ever seen. And it's funny when you watch it now and you realize how the quality of the digital compared to now. But I think at the time, I was just blown away by the look and everything, and thinking it would just. It probably looked like when you look at old video games and you remember back in the day that was cutting edge and how amazing that looked. And when you look at it now and you just go, oh, I can't believe how dated it is. But at the time, I remember just thinking it was just so sort of almost, futuristic feeling in a way, like cutting edge stuff happening.
It kind of felt like a turning point in filmmaking, didn't it? And it was in a way. And I think, digital filmmaking, the quality of it got better and better throughout the 2000s. But like this as one of those kind of early examples, it's so interesting. But I think it works. Like, I think it does look dated, but the graininess kind of just adds to that horror, doesn't it? Sure. It almost looks like what we talk about now is kind of analog horror, or again, found footage, or those sorts of things. So I think it feels of a piece with the other horror movies we were getting around the turn of the millennium, like J horror and like Blair Witch and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
It does make it feel so much more immediate and real. And I mean, we'll talk a bit later about kind of the whole thing of how it comes out post 9/11, but it looks like a lot of footage that people were just shooting on their own personal cameras, which again, especially when I think 9/11 happens, because it's just such a sudden, shocking thing that, they didn't have news cameras set up to capture it. So a lot of what people were seeing of that like huge cataclysmic event was what people had shot on their digital cameras. So preemptively, this film, watching the news now, so much of it often relies on just what people have captured. So it was kind of the first time seeing that in a film. So it's kind of foreseeing so much of how we see and what disasters kind of look like now.
Definitely. I think you're right. I think like everything was about to change in terms of technology throughout the 2000s, right? And this was just before we were getting stuff like YouTube, but it was on the cusp of getting stuff like camera phones, and suddenly we would get used to kind of low res footage that people will just, from cameras that people will just have in their pocket all the time, and I remember getting those kind of like mid 2000s kind of flip phones that had kind of cameras on them, and the cameras were really bad, right? But you could still capture stuff in a way that you never could before, and people didn't mind. People were able to see past the bad graininess of an image to see whatever kind of shocking footage you had captured on this camera that you had, and like you say, 9/11 is the ultimate example of that. But we saw it more and more and more through the 2000s with news footage of things like the Iraq war that was going on and various other things. People were there was much more being caught on camera than ever before, right? So the whole culture was changing at this point.
There's this whole thing about everything. Our lives now are all mediated through digital cameras and camera phones and things. So
now we're never not on camera, really. So Although it's funny when I was looking up, and this film is shot in 480p resolution. Wow!
If you see that like a YouTube video with 480p, you're like, oh god, this is awful.
Absolutely, that would be. I mean, that's the thing, right? It's like even our phones now are like 10 times better than you can get like 4K on an iPhone now, right? So it's like, it's amazing how far it's come since in the last 25 years. Yeah.
And Liam, I mean, you run your programming.
Yeah. I was going to say,
which is all,
because I do the distorted frame and the first screen, because it was all focusing on digital films shot on digital in the 2000s. And 28 Days Later was the very first screening we did, because it was like, that has to be the first one. And it was actually because 28 Years was about to come out, so the rights were really hard to get hold of, but we persevered and we got there because we just like, we have to screen this as the first one. Because it's like, it's sort of almost the text for the like sort of all of this digital cinema that came out afterwards.
That's so interesting. It feels like a kind of game changer in that regard.
And that also makes me think, like, just thinking about I guess just the thing with digital video is that you're able to kind of shoot in such low light in comparison to film. So I think, like, even quite early on in the film, for me, it's that first scene in the church.
Oh,
I mean, after you have the streets of London, and then in the church, and how that's so dark, and again, it's also quite blurry. Like when he's looking down and he like sees the bodies, it almost like you almost can't tell what they are. And then there's that person that kind of like pops up, looks up, and
horrible.
That scene.
That scene absolutely terrified me when I first watched it. That was the first scene that really scared me in the film. And you're right. There's a sense of kind of the uncanny about it, I think, because you can't really see what you're looking at. And then when that person sits up and you hear him walk up the stairs and he's walking towards us and he's kind of walking in such a weird, jilted way. And at that point, we still really have no idea what's going on, right? And what's happened and what this person wants. And yeah, I think it's that unknowability and that, like you say, you can barely make out what you're seeing that makes it absolutely terrifying. I mean, it's perfect for horror, I think. Yeah.
It's funny because so when Liam screened 28 Days Later, Liam, you put on your like promotional material that this was a zombie film, and you got a lot of angry responses.
Yes.
Mike, the big question, is this a zombie film?
Of course it's a zombie film. Yeah, I it's splitting hairs, isn't it? Like, I think that this is so silly because, and I know that I believe Danny Boyle said this wasn't a zombie film. I think Alex Garland said it was, and Danny Boyle said it wasn't, or one way around or the other. But I understand what they mean. If we get, but people will think of zombies as people that claw their way out of graves and come and try and eat our brains, like in George Romero films. But if you want to be really pedantic about it, a zombie is a voodoo, Haitian person that is being controlled by a witch or of some kind, right? So actually, if we're going to get really specific about it, it's not even what a lot of people say are zombies. So I think that again, and I did a whole series on zombies and the way in which that evolved. But I think even if you don't call these monsters zombies, this is a zombie film. This is a zombie narrative, right? Alex Garland, I think, has cited films like Day of the Dead when he was kind of writing this, as inspiration. It is an apocalyptic situation where the world, humanity has been wiped out by this kind of pandemic that is turning people into kind of crazy monsters that want to, eat you and rip your flesh apart and everything. And yeah, I mean, they are zombies. They're much scarier than zombies in a lot of ways, but it still follows the zombie narrative of like, it's the end of the world. These kind of ghouls are everywhere trying to get us. And there's a small group of survivors that have to find a way to kind of survive this and potentially start the world over from scratch, essentially, right? So I think, yes, technically it's not a zombie, but of course it is a zombie film. I would always call this a zombie film.
It's not the dead coming back to life, but they are kind of harbingers of the apocalypse, which I think it is very much in the Romero vein, I think. And they even have the obligatory scene of them in a abandoned shopping center, going through and getting all the products and things. And it's definitely, for me, it follows all the kind of tropes that definitely go back to like the Romero zombie films.
For sure.
It's definitely using the zombie grammar. like there's an infection, there's a collapse of society, there are groups of survivors, and the Romero aspects of it is like you look at all these different survivor groups, and that tells you different things about sort of the psychology of these characters and of society itself. But then I think it also is smartly trying to undercut some of that stuff with like, these are fast creatures. They're not the slow shambling, stumbling ones. And what I like about it as well is that the infection is takes seconds to come. Like it's not, there's no one like in zombie films where you see someone get bitten and then they hide the wound and it takes the whole movie because at some point in the finale, they've got to turn and make it really difficult for the rest of the characters. It's like, no, their turn, shoot them, they're dead. On to the next thing. There's this kind of more immediacy to the whole thing, which I find really interesting.
Absolutely. Just that idea of them being infected with something called rage as well. Like, there's something weirdly, I think, quite prescient about that too, about humanity's kind of absolute kind of the way in which humanity destroys itself with rage, essentially, right? And tearing each other to shreds. I mean, done kind of writ large as a horror film here, but there is something kind of interesting there about humanity and what we do to ourselves, and particularly over the last 20 years or so since this movie has come out too. So I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I agree, and I think that the energy of the fast zombies, that's what makes them so scary. I think, you know, that they are really frightening, the zombies in this, because they're so fast, and you'd expect nothing less from Danny Boyle in a way. You know, like. Yeah. You think of Train Spotting and it begins with like Ewan McGregor like running down the road, or the beginning of Slumdog Millionaire where you've got the kids like running through the slums. Like there is this kind of energy and momentum with everything Danny Boyle does. So it's no wonder that his take on the zombie film is like the fastest paced zombies we've ever seen, you know?
And then also in the 2000s, there is that beginning of the fast zombies. So I think Resident Evil was that would have been before 28 Days Later.
Yeah,
but I think that has fast zombies, doesn't it?
Does it have fast zombies? Maybe it does. I mean, I'm not the biggest Resident Evil fan. I can't remember. So it was the same year. It was 2002. So yeah, it probably would have been made before this. But yeah, I can't remember if they had fast zombies or not. Maybe they did.
Yeah, and then there's of course the Dawn of the Dead remake, which comes a couple of years later, which has very much the fast zombies. And then because I kind of think about the infected in this film and the zombie infection thing that's happening in Wreck a few years later, they seem very much of the same kind of ilk.
Wreck is completely the same vibe, isn't it? You know, I mean, that literally is found footage, but I think that those were the two films I discussed together as a pair when I covered them on my zombie series, 28 Days Later and Wreck, because they feel similarly absolutely terrifying, right? Like your heart in your mouth, while you've got these like rabid infected people running around and coming at you. So yeah, I think this movie did change zombies in that regard, right? Like I think it changed the kind of the style of zombie movies. There's kind of, I always see it when looking at the history of zombie films as like there's pre-28 Days, there's pre-Night of the Living Dead and post-Night of the Living Dead, and there's pre-28 Days Later and post-28 Days Later.
Definitely.
You know? Yeah.
And if I mean, Wreck was another film that we screened for Distorted Frame as well, because for Halloween, our first Halloween screening was Wreck, because it's like, how can you pass that up?
So scary.
It's so good. And I think it didn't, but even like a decade after, or roughly, you get like World War Z, which, you know, again has I think they've got the fast zombies in there, don't they? And like Train to Busan. But that's where it's kind of like, well, what if we had fast zombies, but also just so many of them that they're just piling up on top of one another, which I think you get a little bit in the 28 Years Later films as well as they go along. So I think it's kind of coming back around full circle in a way.
So the whole thing with like zombies, like I remember talking with someone, years ago, just getting into horror films, and they were saying, you know, with zombies, and they were like saying, yeah, but they're just so slow. You just run away. So I guess the whole thing with zombies usually is it's just a mass. And then I do remember that I remember my friend when talking about this, and then I remember, well, actually, there's a film called Tombs of the Blind Dead, and it was like, not only are they slow, but they're blind.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah.
But I think also the other aspect of the film that is very in keeping with the Romero zombies is that I always go back to the quote from Romero where he says, in my films, the villains are the living.
Yeah.
You always have this threat, but it's not really the main thing you should really be worried about. The fact that it's a psychological virus, and the fact that they find it in a lab, you know, where they're doing these horrible tests on these chimps. It's like, it's interesting. It's, you know, humans kind of inhumanity to other creatures, but yeah, it's kind of like that always seemed like that's kind of the worst of humanity is what they're doing in the lab.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it, in some ways, it is another. I could have discussed it in my current Man-Made Monsters series, right? It's human beings that created this virus and doing, like you say, unspeakable things to these animals at the beginning, and that's where it begins. And yeah, absolutely. Throughout, by the time you get to the final act, where we're at the kind of military base, It's like they are much more the villains, right? And again, that is very Day of the Dead. That's very Romero, that you figures in power, like the military or politicians or, you know, people like that. They're the ones that you have to fear often, not the zombies. Yeah.
Yeah, the zombies are kind of just a catalyst for humans to have to deal with each other in close quarters, and that's where the problems begin. Even if the zombies are slow, it's like, well, they're going to get here eventually, but in the meantime, we're just probably going to tear each other apart because we just can't deal with it.
I guess that was what the whole of The Walking Dead was, wasn't it? Really,
Yeah, totally.
That's what it was about. It was about these characters coming together and all of the various different kind of awful people they came across, you know, throughout those 10 seasons or whatever it was.
That's right. Yeah.
It kind of brings us to like the protagonist of the film, Jim. You know, he wakes up at the beginning of the film and he's kind of missed the whole infection. And so it's kind of very obvious, like, audience substitute that as he's going along and figuring it out, it's like us as well. The people he meets up with there's Selena and then Hannah and Frank. And so each of the people that he's encountering, and then later on, obviously, Major West and the soldiers, they seem to be, so Jim feels very kind of, he's just reacting because he just has no knowledge. He's just kind of so vulnerable. So I just wanted to kind of, talk about, like, what do you think are kind of what is he kind of learning? Because we're going on about, you know, how it is the humans and how they, you know, react to these kind of, this threat.
Yeah.
If you can talk about, like, especially I think Selena, Frank, and Hannah, because Selena in particular, I think she has such this, I'm not going to get attached.
Yes.
I'm going to be so, like, just rational. And I think she even says just surviving is as good as it gets.
Yeah, exactly. Which is bleak, isn't it? Her character, she's clearly been through so much by the time we meet her, and she's kind of lost all hope in happiness, in relationships, in anything in life. It's just all about survival, essentially, for her at that point, right? And I think in some ways she goes on more of a journey than Jim does, actually. But I think they all need each other, don't they? So Jim kind of wakes up and he's dealing with what's going on, but he kind of brings a bit of heart and humanity, I think. And I think him and Selena both realize together that it's not enough just to survive, right? You need to have a sense of kind of family, I suppose, right? And they kind of both get that through the character of Frank and his daughter, and they become a kind of new makeshift family in a sense, don't they? You know, when they get together, and you know, they all have things that the others benefit from, I suppose. You know, you've got characters that are maybe tougher and better fighters, but you've got these other characters that kind of maybe have a bit more heart and can bring a bit more of that heart out of characters like Selena. So, again, this is kind of a classic kind of Romero thing. I think we've seen it in kind of classic zombie cinema before, but that idea of kind of the survivors coming together and kind of forming a new family, I suppose, and realizing that ultimately that's the most important thing. And by the end of the film, there's something almost quite cathartic, I think, about zombie films, about, like, what if we just wipe society clean and start again, right? And we see this in the 28 Years Later films, the recent ones, but this idea of, like, just starting from scratch. You see, you know, Jim and Selena and the kid living in this little cottage in the English countryside. And actually, it's like, if you strip away all of humanity's bullshit, technology and war and politics and everything else, and it's like, let's just go back to the very basic fundamental human things that matter. And I think that's what zombie films do at their best, right? They kind of, like, hold humanity under a microscope and kind of, they almost show us how ridiculous the world is, actually, and how none of that really matters ultimately. That the only things that matters are living and relationships and being happy, essentially. And so, you know, which is a very schmaltzy way to describe this film. And this film doesn't really have that, but I think there is that element running through it, you know, towards the end. Yeah,
because I think Selena's character, the way she starts off is one of the problems I have with apocalypse films of, like, why do you just keep going? Like, it's everything's just gone to shit. Like, why keep living? And her whole thing is, like, kill fast or die, and, like, don't get attached. And it's like, well, then what are you living for? And ultimately the message is, Yeah. So it's like you're just living day to day trying to survive, but for what reason? Like, why don't you just lie down and die and let them kill you? I mean, so that's her arc, is that you live for others. You find people to live for, to sacrifice for, because that's what gives life meaning, no matter what's going on outside the window.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's really interesting. And just to go about your point about the kind of, there's this film doesn't really go the romantic route, but there is a romanticism about end of the world narratives as well. Like, films like Zombieland, which is kind of like, wouldn't it all just be a lot of fun? Yeah, this romanticism of like people wanting to start fresh, to have a clean slate and to be like, well, I don't have to work my day job anymore. I can now like pick up a chainsaw or do this and do that. And I think there's the film through these characters, this found family push through that whole element of like, well, can make the argument for like what survival actually should mean, and in comparison to, or in the mirror reflecting Major West and his troops, who are like the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, completely. I think that is, and again, we've seen that. Dawn of the Dead kind of introduced that a little bit, where Night of the Living Dead was this kind of really terrifying story of survival. But then Dawn of the Dead kind of goes, and what if we could have a bit of fun here by like living in a shopping mall and, shooting the zombies and custard pie fights and all of that stuff. It's like, it suddenly turns the idea of a zombie apocalypse into like, almost, I mean, not quite romanticized maybe in these films, but there is something almost kind of cathartic and fun about the zombie narrative in that way, isn't it? About like stripping away all of the rules and kind of just like starting from scratch and going back to basics.
There is that almost fantasy element of like, what if you could just go into a store and just, it doesn't matter what you...
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
money
Frank
isn't an
leaving his
object
card
anymore
at the end when they do the shopping in the film, and he leaves his debit card.
Exactly. There's something quite kind of joyous, isn't there, about the empty supermarket scene in this, when they run around with the trolley. Again, there is something kind of like weirdly, there is a kind of fantasy element, like you say, about that. Yeah.
And like Jim takes the cheap scotch out of habit, and then Frank's like, no, you want the 12-year-old. Like we can just take as many as we want.
I love Frank talking about scotch. It's the apocalypse, but you got to get the good stuff.
Oh yeah,
hell yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Talk about what to survive for. It's the good stuff. It's the good
Absolutely,
scotch.
You might as well enjoy yourself, right? Yeah.
I mean, which is why I think, when Frank turns, it really is just such a gut punch. It's like every time I watch the film, I'm like coming up to that point, I'm like, no, don't kick the gate. What are you doing?
I know.
Yeah.
It's and again, it's so tragic and it's so fast. It's brutal and it's over with in like 2 minutes, isn't it? From that drop of blood going in his eye to the realization of what's happened, and then it's like bam, done. And it is like, yeah you're right. It's really tragic because we've started to learn to love these characters at this point. And then it all just comes crumbling down. And you're right, that is a kind of turning point of the film. That's when things start to get dark again at that point, right? And it's sad. I miss Frank in the second half. Yeah.
I would just say, like, when with their trip out of London towards Manchester, that's when you do get that romantic element comes in, where it's like they're just going on this becomes this lovely road trip and this picnic, and but I mean, it is marked by certain events, like Jim kills a kid and like so there are these reminders of what's actually going on in the world, and you get a glimpse into kind of what Jim's actually capable of. But it becomes this fun little jaunt around, and then Frank's death does it kicks us into this darker mode, but it's when Selena kind of backtracks as well, right? Where she's like, I knew I shouldn't have trusted anybody. I knew I shouldn't have loved anybody. Everything's shit. Like, why, she reverts to her old philosophy, and it's kind of Jim's job to bring her back from that.
I think it's almost like the scene just before they arrive and Frank turns, that Selena says to Jim, I was wrong when I said staying alive is as good as it gets, and it's because of Hannah. So it's almost like as soon as she lets herself feel that, it immediately gets kind of ripped away. And I always kind of almost think that, obviously Frank is this father figure, and they lose him. He's this gentle, kind father figure. And then almost immediately, because he's shot by the soldiers, and it's kind of, he's immediately replaced by the awful father figure of Major Henry West. So it's almost like this immediate turn, this shift that happens. So let's talk about they're promised the salvation from infection at this place, and obviously we find out that that's not really what is there. So, Mike, just tell us about like what are Major West's aims here? Can you see the kind of reasoning behind what Henry West is doing?
Well, I guess you can see the reasons behind it, but this is the really scary, bleak, disturbing part of the film, isn't it? Where this salvation turns out to be a different kind of horror, which is essentially we want to sexually assault these women, essentially, right? Like, and he says all this stuff about like my boys, my men haven't seen a woman in ages. Like, it's not just even of the, you know, it would be one thing if there was just the excuse of like we need to start repopulating the earth, but I think there's also this element of like, my boys just haven't had any fun in ages, right? Like, let's get on with it. And so, yeah, this is where suddenly you start to see that Romero humanity at its worst kind of element where, you know, ultimately you kind of think maybe we deserve to go at this point, you know? And it was definitely the part when I first watched the film as like a 14, 15-year-old that I found was the half of the movie I enjoyed less, you know, because I was really like, I missed the zombie horror, and this is much more kind of human bleakness, but it works really well, I think, you know, watching it now, that kind of journey that it goes on. And you do get a kind of good catharsis at the end when Jim kind of runs around killing them all. But it's pretty bleak, isn't it?
One of our most recent episodes, we looked at John Carpenter and we looked at The Thing. And John Carpenter said that he made The Thing as a film with no hope, and that's also a film with no women in it.
Yeah.
So it is this whole thing of like, I mean, West even says women mean a future, but it's also at the expense of women's freedom. And it's always interesting that, you know, that there's these soldiers, that they're all these men and they've no women, and so the only way he can keep them going is to promise to give them women. But I also think like that they also have Private Mailer who they're keeping, who's been infected, and they're keeping him, and he's obviously really suffering. He's just completely full of this rage virus, and he's vomiting blood, and it's really kind of awful. And I also think the fact that they can't, like, the Private Mailer is a black soldier. So you have this image of this black man in chains. So it's almost like they're building up society again, but they're perpetuating the old systems of women are property, black people are in chains. So like it really is the absolute worst aspects of humanity. And it's like they just want to repeat it all again.
And it's like they've taken this opportunity to get back to those days, essentially, right? To, you know, to take back control, quote unquote, or whatever it may be. all of these like white men. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. It's dark. It's so dark.
Well, yeah, because you get West as basically like his promise of women is what's keeping them from killing him. Basically, like there's this illusion of power with West where I think he's like, if I don't deliver on my promise, then they're probably gonna kill me, turn on me. And then it's just going to be pure chaos. And so it's like, and I think what Garland and Boyle are showing is the kind of civilization as this like is almost this thin veneer, and that these power structures come back and get reinforced because there's nothing left other than these things that are kind of built into our psyche, I guess. So I think it shows that West is not actually, he's in the position of authority, but is he really in a position of power? Where it's like, it's almost like he's just holding on by a thread with these bunch of animals. And the other thing is that it's also showing kind of like the infected, at least they're honest in a way. Like when you see an infected, you know to run because they're going to kill you. When they show up to the base or to the mansion and see the military, they first think, oh, military, they'll protect us. But really they harbor this dark secret and this plan that they want to enact. So it's like, in a way, the infected are the more honest creatures.
Yeah, it's like Ripley says in Aliens, doesn't she? Something like that. Like, you don't see the aliens screwing each other over for a buck or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know which species is worse. At least they don't screw each other over for a percentage.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. A tale as old as time, isn't it? Yeah.
The climactic battle, which you mentioned, it's like, it is so cathartic. But it also, in that sequence, Jim going around taking his revenge almost, he becomes like an infected.
Yeah, he looks infected, doesn't he? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you could just kind of talk to us about how that kind of sequence, so we've kind of been confronted with the worst of humanity. Now Jim has kind of come back to try, I guess, save Selena and Hannah. It's almost like it's kind of showing us the thin line, or how is it showing us this thin line between humans and the infected?
Yeah, I guess, again, it's that classic, it's rage, isn't it? You know, like we've called the infection rage throughout the movie, and Jim has a genuine rage in what's happened to him and these two women, and so it blurs the line, obviously, and it's kind of, the metaphor is almost taken away here by actually watching human beings tear each other to shreds in the way that the zombies have been doing previously. So again, it's kind of wearing its themes on its sleeve, I think, but there is something really, again, just the way that Boyle kind of directs those scenes, the kind of shaky camera work, and it's kind of handheld, and everything is running and fast paced, and the music and everything. There is something really kind of, again, heart-stopping and climactic and cathartic about what we're seeing, right? It's kind of flipped the opening scenes of the running through the streets from the infected on their head, and now we're seeing our hero kind of do that to the other humans, right? And so, yeah, I think it comes full circle kind of beautifully, I would say.
And then I also kind of feel like it's interesting at the beginning of the film, the doctor, when they in the lab, says something about, the troops are infected with rage because in order to cure, you must first understand. But it's this whole thing of like, how can you cure this emotion? And actually at this point, kind of Jim's rage is kind of righteous and justified. Like It's almost also kind of saying like, maybe there's something to rage. It isn't just this negative emotion that should be erased.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe sometimes we need to feel angry. Maybe sometimes we need to feel rage at injustice or violence or whatever else that we're seeing happen in front of us. Yeah.
So, yeah, when the film comes out, it's kind of post 9/11. It's one of the first films, I think there's this quote from Danny Boyle. He kind of says that it was the first film that approached a kind of sense of panic and vulnerability, like the vulnerability of cities, especially, that after 9/11 everything changed, and this suddenly did seem like it was the first film that was really directly engaging with it, even though he had obviously was made. Oh, I think 9/11 happened while they were filming.
Yeah, no, I could say they were literally filming. And Danny Boyle was saying to me in an interview last year that they were literally filming in a tower block in London when the Twin Towers were going down. So I think they had to kind of halt filming for a bit. But yeah, it wasn't intended to be a post 9/11 movie, but it was obviously, because it was being made at the time, it was one of the first movies out post 9/11. Yeah.
And it wasn't there the scene when he sees all the photos of loved ones posted on the board at Piccadilly Circus. They had to edit that down, maybe just for the American market, I don't know, because it was too similar to what people had been doing for 9/11. And it just so happened that they'd done it for the film, not knowing that was going to happen, obviously. And then in the post-production, they had to cut that down because it was too triggering for people and too recent in memory.
Yeah.
So there were some eerie parallels going on there.
Sure, yeah, and it's amazing actually when you watch it now and you assume it was made post 9/11 with those shots of kind of mass panic in the streets of London, to the empty streets, to the photos, to all of that stuff. It's a really eerie parallel, isn't it? Like you say.
Then watching it now post COVID, it also has this extra resonance. We kind of experienced how things can change so quickly. The fear of not knowing what a virus can do. And also I kind of think, again, of that time, like the whole thing about wearing masks and how there was all this rage and this division around. And the whole thing of like wearing a mask is actually to protect other people.
Yeah.
And how that just became such a point of contention amongst people. And it really, like, I remember myself being on like the tube or whatever at that time, and people not wearing masks, and it would enrage me.
Yeah.
I would feel like, why don't you care about other people?
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember feeling that anger.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. I think, again, like I remember, and there was almost like, I think people were even posting memes of 28 Days Later because of lockdown and because of suddenly seeing it, London that empty, right? And so there were kind of eerie parallels. And like you say, just how quickly a virus can spread and just change the whole world, essentially. So again, there is something oddly, scarily prescient about 28 Days Later in loads of ways, I think.
For sure.
I mean, it was also like, I remember I was watching interviews of Danny Boyle when the film first came out, and he was saying, like, yeah, rage is such a problem at the moment, really right now. And I'm like, you
strap in.
Yeah, you have no idea.
Yeah. Because I was been like, this is kind of off topic, but like we've just been getting really into the television series The Pit.
Same. I'm obsessed. I'm already midway through season 2. It's incredible. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. And like in that season, I remember because there's that one bit where like that nurse gets punched out by a guy.
Yeah.
And I think she even says like, yeah, people are just angrier now. And that whole series is about like, I think just the trauma of post like COVID and it's just changed everyone. And so yeah, it's weird. Like when I was watching The Pit and then thinking about this film, I'm like, it's
for sure.
Completely.
The rage virus is
real.
Certainly spread.
It's alive and well. Absolutely. Yeah.
And now we have the sequels, 28 Years Later and The Bone Temple, that have just recently come out. I mean, 28 Years Later was like one of my absolute favorite films of last year. And The Bone Temple is probably going to be one of my favorites of this year.
Yeah.
Are they going to make the third one? Because I know that the second one
I think it's
didn't
not looking
do so well.
It's not looking good. Yeah, it's not looking good.
Oh,
and
no.
It's so sad because these films are both incredible in their own ways, like you said. At The Bone Temple especially, I absolutely loved it. I'll be surprised if it's not my number one horror film of the year by the time we get to the end of the year. But it was a beautiful, haunting, terrifying, brilliant, brutal film. And I love going back to this world, all these years later and seeing that continuation, seeing some characters that we recognize, but also just seeing what this world looks like after this amount of time has passed and seeing what that has done to society and everything. And there are loads more kind of interesting metaphors that they've played with now. I think Alex Garland is also kind of looking at sort of post-Brexit Britain now, and that idea of kind of the UK being isolated from the rest of Europe and the rest of the world, right? And what that means. And there's a lot of imagery, particularly in 28 Years Later, that Danny Boyle put in of like England and what that means to be English and the war and all of that kind of like interesting kind of heritage stuff that he puts in as well with his kind of in his kind of Danny Boyle way. And I think they're amazing. I think there is something so interesting about this whole series. I mean, maybe not 28 Weeks Later, but if you take Days, Years and Bone Temple, there is something so interesting about the way that these films kind of hold up a mirror, not just to humanity, but I think specifically to Britain, right? To the UK. There's something so inherently British, down to even the fact that the villains look like Jimmy Savile in The Bone Temple, right? There's something so British that I think they're really interesting in that way.
Liam, did you notice any connections watching 20 Years Later again after seeing the new ones?
Yeah, so like, I mean, I absolutely love the sequels. And I think The Bone Temple especially is like, I think it's a shame that no one went to see it because it is really, really quite spectacular. Well, I did pick up on when Jim's locked up with what's the name of the sergeant who kind of goes against them as well? Farrell. And he's talking, he actually has that kind of like rant where he says like, he's like, do you think any of this is going on in Paris and New York or what have you? He's like, they've isolated us, they've quarantined us, and it sounds like he's just it's a paranoid ramble of he's just saying, well, this is it. Like the rest of the world's gone on and forgotten us, and it's like, and that's played out in the sequels all these years later. Like they actually come down and say no, with because you get the character with the guys who end up stranded on the island after. Is he from Sweden or something? Like the
and he's got an iPhone and like
And the kid doesn't know what to do with it, and doesn't understand lip injections, and they actually really go for that to say, oh yeah, the rest of the world's fine. Like it's Britain that's been quarantined off and has been frozen in time. So I was interested to see in 28 Days Later, like actually there was the seeds of that were planted way back then. So yeah,
completely, yeah. And it's funny just to see how little, when you look at the fact that it's just an iPhone and it looks like a normal iPhone, and the pictures he's showing could just look like real pictures, and it's also kind of emphasizing how little Britain has mattered maybe over the last 20 years, like how it hasn't really seemed to have affected technology or culture in the rest of the world too. I think there's something quite funny about that. Yeah,
and I think to go back to the romanticism thing of it, and being an Australian and having lived in the UK for over 10 years, and that Boyle's kind of doing with the war imagery and stuff like that, is that romantic notion of like the Blitz spirit and things like that, of like almost this wanting to return to something like that to kind of show the world again what the country's capable of. And it's like, but the world's a different place now, you know. It's moved on from all of that.
Well, absolutely. And I think there's something that Alex Garland is exploring overtly, which is he's examining the idea of nostalgia, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Weird obsession we all have these days with nostalgia, and down to, like you say, the kind of the some of the clips and that kind of Blitz spirit, but also even the use of Jimmy Savile Teletubbies type iconography in the sequel, and this idea of kind of looking back and getting things back, and this obsession that we've had in politics and everywhere of like, take back control, make America great again. Like this idea of like things were better back then, and we want to make it back like how it was back then, you know, and even just in a more kind of frothy way, just social media, pop culture, we're obsessed with going back to the 90s, back to the 80s. Even the idea of 28 years later and going back to that world is inherently nostalgic, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
I think there's also been this kind of interesting exploration of the idea of nostalgia here. Yeah.
And I especially love that what Ray Fiennes says in The Bone Temple, where even he's the one who's old enough to remember the world before the events, right? But even he says he can't really quite grasp. And he's just like, all I remember is that there was this feeling of like, I can't remember exactly what he says, but like a feeling of achievement, like we'd got there, that everything had been like achieved, and there was nothing else for us to do, and we all felt really pleased with ourselves, and like that. He just remembers this feeling that pervaded throughout. But all he has left are he's got his little books, but he's got his Duran Duran records and Radiohead. So it's like he's piecing together his past through just like media, basically.
Yeah.
And then you have Jimmy Crystal, who's like creating all these new stories about he calls them the Teletubbies, and like it's all these. He doesn't have the artifacts anymore. It's all his own memory, and he creates these narratives,
kind of warped them,
and really warped and just like completely unhinged, and cherry picking all these bits and creating mythology out of these bits and pieces. Yeah, and so it's this great juxtaposition in that. Oh, it's such a good film.
So good.
Also, I mean, you mentioned like Alex Garland seems interested in this stuff, but then I think about like Danny Boyle. Like, isn't T2 Trainspotting? Isn't that so much about that you can't recapture something, kind of toxic nature of nostalgia? And I haven't seen Yesterday, and I guess I don't know if you've seen it, Mike.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's not very good.
Yeah,
right. It's
the Beatles or something.
Beatles. Yeah, exactly. I mean, even just that title, Yesterday, right? There is something about nostalgia and looking back. Yeah, I mean, I think Danny Boyle has certainly had that. He's spoken about that, I think, in the kind of later year, like these kind of more recent years of his career. He's reflecting back on his own career too, right? It's kind of like, and you see a lot of filmmakers do that with their work as they go on. And I think it's almost like he's reckoning with his own legacy on cinema with films like Trainspotting and 28 Days Later, you know, and what they did to his career and to cinema and pop culture generally. So, yeah, I think all of that stuff's really interesting.
It's obviously an obsession for maybe just people of like his and like Boyle and Garland's generation.
Yeah.
And we do kind of not, especially right now, lionizing the 1990s. Although interestingly enough, just a very quick story, I showed a class of, I guess, around 18, 19-year-olds about a year ago, Trainspotting. So we had it was when I was finishing where I used to work. So it was the last class with my film history class. and we were supposed to do a lecture on British cinema. And they were like, "Oh, you're leaving. We should have a celebration. Let's watch a film together or something."
Yeah.
And I was like, "All right, so you have to pick a film. But because we're supposed to do this class on British cinema, you all have to pick a British film." And so they pretty much all picked Trainspotting.
Wow.
That's what they chose.
There you go.
And so I was like, all right, we'll watch it together. And I remember putting it on and I was saying to them, yep, this came out, when I was around your age.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. I hadn't seen it in several years. And then I was watching it, and then, there is, the dead baby and all that stuff. And I remember sitting there going, oh God. I did warn them beforehand. I did say, look, there's some pretty dark stuff here, just so you know. And I also thought, oh, how are they going to react to the whole, was it Kelly MacDonald's character when she shows up in the school uniform? I was like, oh God, what are they? But they all loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's great, isn't it? And it's nasty and bleak, and it's about nasty. It's a nasty, bleak world that it's portraying, and it does it so well.
But yeah, they had, like you keep saying, they had fun though at the same time. As I was watching it, a few moments in my heart, I was like, my stomach's, was like, oh God, I hope they're going to be okay with this.
Yeah,
and they were. Yeah. Shall we move on to Sunshine?
Yeah.
Our sun is dying. Mankind faces extinction. 16 months ago, I, Robert Capa, and a crew of 7 left Earth frozen in a solar winter. Our mission, reignite the sun before it's too late. Welcome to Icarus 2. So if you wake up one morning and it's a particularly beautiful day, you'll know we made it.
It is 2057. The sun is dying and the earth is freezing. The crew of Icarus 2 is sent out to detonate a bomb that will reignite the sun. As they pass by Mercury, they receive a distress call from Icarus 1, which had disappeared on the same mission 7 years earlier. The crew debate whether to answer the signal, as it will take them off course. It is then decided that the physicist, Robert Capa, will make the call. Capa believed that getting another payload will mean they will have 2 last hopes instead of 1. However, when recalculating their route, the navigator Trey fails to realign their shields that protect the ship from direct sunlight. The ship's captain, Kaneda, and Capa go outside the ship to repair the damage, leading to Kaneda's death. Icarus 2 docks with Icarus 1 to gain their lost resources. Crew members Capa, Mace, new Captain Harvey, and ship's psychologist Searle find the crew's charred bodies and a communication from the Icarus 1's captain, Pinbacker, that their mission defies God, leading him to sabotage the ship's mainframe. The team are left stranded on board with only 1 spacesuit. Harvey demands to have the suit, but Mace insists it is given to Capa as he is the only one who can arm the bomb. Searle stays on the Icarus 1, sacrificing himself as the other 2 cling to Capa in makeshift suits, but Harvey doesn't make it back onto the ship. Back on the ship, Corazon tells them that while there are 5 people on board, they only have enough oxygen to sustain 4 people on the mission to the sun. The team debate whether to kill Trey, who is suicidal. They vote to kill him, but when Mace goes to do so, he has already slit his wrists. The ship's computer still detects 5 people on board, though. Pinbacker is still alive, and he starts attacking the crew. He kills Corazon and traps Capa in an airlock. Mace goes to repair the ship's mainframe but dies in the process. Capa frees himself and deploys the payload, jumping into it as Icarus 2 fails. Inside the payload, he finds Cassie, who is now catatonic. Pinbacker attacks them. Cassie reaches out for Capa as he pulls the skin from Pinbacker's arms. Capa detonates the bomb and reaches out to the sun. We then see Capa's sister on Earth as the sun begins to shine on the frozen ground.
Okay, so, Mike, how did you discover this film? When did you first see it?
I saw this movie in the cinema, so I would have been at university in 2007. So I would have been 20 years old, and by this point, big Danny Boyle fan. So I absolutely went straight to the cinema to see it, and loved it actually. And I think it's funny. My opinion of it has kind of slightly flipped in that I remember actually, as a kind of gore, horror hungry kind of teenager watching it, finding it a little bit slow and navel gazy in places, but then quite liking it when it goes all kind of balls out slasher at the end. And I think I've gone the other way now, where I kind of much prefer the kind of first 2/3, and the final act for me is a little bit naff in comparison. But I still think it has so much interesting stuff in it. It almost feels to me, actually, really interestingly, we've talked a lot about how Danny Boyle's style is so distinct. Actually, now that this is the first time I've watched it in probably about 10 years, and it's definitely the first time I've watched it post Alex Garland becoming a director. And I actually think this in a lot of ways feels more like an Alex Garland movie than a Danny Boyle movie, right? It feels more akin to Annihilation or Devs or Ex Machina, in terms of its kind of tone and vibe and pacing and everything, So I think it was really interesting to watch in that regard as the kind of little time capsule of the way in which Alex Garland is slowly growing as a kind of figure in cinema as well. But generally, I think it's great. I think it's like underrated and not enough people talk about it, So it was nice to watch it again.
Yeah. So Liam and I, we saw this at the cinema together because we would have been together for a couple of years. So yeah. Amazing. I remember seeing it in the cinema. I remember quite liking it. I remember thinking that it kind of lost its way a bit towards the end. And I was looking at reviews, and it did seem to be kind of the consensus view at the time that it starts off with some interesting ideas and then loses it a bit towards the end. Yes. And then watching it again, I don't think I'd seen it since we saw it at the cinema.
I don't think so either. I think maybe once before. I think maybe I'd seen it once again, but I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, so it's been almost 20 years since seeing it. But I still remember that there are certain images that really stuck with me. For some reason I really remember the stuff about the greenhouse. And I do remember the Mark Strong character, how Pinbacker, how he comes out again. And I think even possibly when we saw it in the cinema, I was maybe falling asleep a bit towards the end. And so maybe that was also, but then watching it again, I still find myself slightly confused about what's happening towards the end as well.
Well, I found that the filmmaking gets a bit much towards the end, doesn't it? With the way, the amount that Danny Boyle kind of distorts the visuals and does all of that kind of thing, and it does get a bit confusing towards the end for sure. Yeah.
Then it looks great, but I'm not quite sure if I'm following a lot of what's happening. But so 28 days later, it's also engaging with this idea of apocalypse. But it's this idea now, how can we save the world from destruction? The whole idea that the sun is dying, and so they have to travel out there to deliver this bomb to detonate, and kind of, what do they say, a star within a star to kind of hopefully make it shine again. So how is this film kind of dealing with this idea of apocalypse through science fiction rather than horror?
Well, I guess the whole thrust of the story is about humanity saving the world rather than watching it destroy itself, which is 28 days later, right? 28 days later, it's like the world has ended. There's a sense of hopelessness. All that's left is kind of pain and horror in a sense. And it's Sunshine, the whole idea of it, this whole mission is these are some of the smartest, best humans on the planet that have been sent to go and save humanity and reignite the sun, essentially, right? And so until its final act, when it actually does go, I would say, full horror, until then, it's dealing much more with the ideas, the kind of big philosophical ideas of kind of saving humanity and the cost of that and the price of that and how you weigh up maybe one life against the lives of the whole human race. And relationships between people and what that means in the kind of void of space and everything. And then, of course, there is also a lot of talk about the science itself, the intricacies of like the payload, the sheer power of the sun, and what it means to be flying that close to it, and how that affects humanity and human beings, and everything to do with even the ship going off course and changing its angle, and how that can kind of affect things and stuff. So it feels like it's kind of leaning much more heavily into the science and the ideas, I suppose, more than just the kind of morality and the consequences of what happens, you know?
And there definitely seems to be some referencing of kind of science fiction classics. Like there's definitely a kind of 2001 element there. I guess Alien and Solaris as well.
Definitely. There's a bit of Event Horizon, I think, in too, isn't
towards
there?
the end, absolutely.
Yeah. I was kind of, I forgot, because again, I haven't seen this film in probably nearly 20 years as well, and I was like, God, it's very Event Horizon in places. Yeah.
But it's funny because I found this quote from Danny Boyle, and he's saying that he he loves science fiction where it's about things that could conceivably happen, and he actually says that he's also not a big fan of Star Wars.
Yeah,
he says I'm more of an alien man. And it's funny because I was also reading that he had planned to do Alien Resurrection, and then he ended up pulling out because he was unsure about a lot of the CGI in it, that it was going to be very CGI heavy, and he didn't feel confident enough with it. And that and so in Sunshine, the CG is only, I think, is when there's shots of outside the ship, but the actual interior of the ship, they built it in apparently a small studio in East London.
I've actually been there. It's 3 Mill Studios in Bow in East London. And it's so funny because that film looks so gorgeous, doesn't it? And it's so funny to look at it now and go, that was shot in Bow in East London in like a warehouse, you know. It's amazing. But I think Danny Boyle, again, is really interesting in that regard. There are a lot of stories about projects that he's turned down or quit. And often I think he's very aware of what he's good at and what he's not. And he gets offered these huge projects. He was going to direct a Bond movie for a bit as well, right? And then he walked off that. And I think sometimes he knows what he's good at. I think he likes to be in control, probably. And particularly when it comes to the kind of visual technical side, I think he'd much rather do something small and contained and scrappy than something really, really vast and huge where maybe he doesn't have that same element of control. So yeah, this suits him, I guess, as a sci-fi adventure film, because even though it is quite epic in a way in its scope and what it's doing, it's also quite a contained little story, isn't it, about like 6 people in a dark ship.
And then I was also reading that Kubrick is an influence, and I think about obviously in the near beginning of 28 Days Later, the shot of the chimp is very Clockwork Orange. Yeah. And then I don't know, as you know, 2001's your favorite film. I don't know if you kind of saw some 2001 influence.
Well, I was going to say about like what was really attractive about this film when it came out as well was being a fan of 2001. It's like when you see a big budget sort of Hollywood film that wants to approach science fiction in this way and have it be at least the process of the space travel being as realistic as possible was really attractive to me. And I think the use of the sun, and I think we're going to talk about this. It's kind of its ever presence, kind of hanging over the film, and it's kind of this. It's an antagonistic force, but it's also this indifferent force. Like that's kind of like the black monolith, I think, in 2001. And you also have this idea of the people things going wrong on the ship and having to sort that out, and the kind of people kind of being their own sort of the human error. Because, in 2001, Hal talks about the human error all the time. And I think this whole thing of like, and it's funny what you said, Mike, about Danny Boyle wanting to be in control. And it's like the threat in this film comes from the idea that they're on this mission, they have to hit these certain points and do all these things. But once they start to change, each little element cascades into this kind of chain reaction of failures because they start to divert from the mission, and that just takes them further and further off the beaten path to the point of almost completely failing. And the first mission already failed. It actually reminds me, funnily enough, it's not Kubrick so much, but like Peter Hyams did the sequel 2010, which I actually think is quite a decent film. I mean, it's for a sequel that should never exist. It's actually very enjoyable and watchable. But that's about the crew going to find the discovery from the first film, and there's kind of shades of elements of that, of like the crew, the self-contained crew, and the issues that they all face on their mission. So I think there's what I find really interesting about that approach is this using the science as not just window dressing, but as like a kind of a driving force of the film, which kind of sets up all of the issues that they have to face going forward.
Yeah, because I was looked in, like Professor Brian Cox was a consultant on the film. And I was looking up, and apparently there was a lot of things that the Danny Boyle made the cast go through. They had to live together. They had to do some space training, scuba diving. Wow. They were put into zero G, and they also operated a Boeing 747 flight simulator. And he also made them watch films together, like The Right Stuff and a documentary about space travel called For All Mankind. So he put them all through. So I guess there's a lot of, I guess, trying to ground it in, I guess, some more facts and reality, which I guess it's sci-fi, is that you're always trying to have that kind of real science.
That's what it feels like, right? It feels a lot more like you're really getting into the nitty-gritty of the science in this, in the way that 2001 did, in the way that films like Interstellar did as well, which I really love. There's a bit of Interstellar about this, I think, in some ways. And 2001, it definitely reminded me of 2001, even just superficially at times, like when they go out and do their spacewalk, and you can just hear like the breathing of Cillian Murphy in the suit, and even when it just goes all crazy, colors and lights bending and everything at the end, and you don't quite know exactly what's happening to Cillian Murphy's character by that final act. Again, is there something almost like transcendent and otherworldly happening at that point? Yeah,
because I think that goes. It's that whole thing of like once you get far enough into the void of space, like reality kind of breaks down, doesn't it? Or like you come in contact with this. Because this whole thing of like the closer they get to the sun, the more things like kind of reality seems to warp, and we get into this kind of metaphysical realm where kind of science disappears, and it's just the unknowable. It's beyond the infinite.
Beyond the Infinite, exactly, which is kind of there's a kind of niche subgenre of horror I've talked about on the podcast called cosmic horror, and that is that, right? Essentially, it goes full cosmic horror by the end of this, which is that idea of like space and the infinite, and these kind of ideas that are almost too big for human beings to comprehend. It's the kind of stuff that drives us to madness or makes our brains pop. That kind of Lovecraftian idea of like, we're exploring something we shouldn't be, and we're not even capable of even kind of comprehending it or perceiving it, Yeah.
And so you have the son having this strong presence throughout the film, and Danny Boyle said he wanted it to have like this like personality. Although I think there was a slight conflict with Boyle and Garland, because Garland is like a fully straight down the line atheist, and I did not know that Danny Boyle grew up as a Catholic and apparently even wanted to be a priest at one point and went to seminary for a while, and then decided against it. And he does say that he's not so much a strict Catholic now, and that he's more agnostic. But he did wanted to have the son be this kind of almost godlike presence. And it is interesting just to have the presence of the sun, because space movies I always think just this vast darkness and blackness and void of space. And then you have quite early on, like I really like the whole like kind of subplot with Searle, and how near the beginning of the film he goes in and asks to have the sunlight. I think it's only like, what do they say, like 2%.
Yeah.
And then as the film progresses, you see like he's wearing sunglasses and he's all sunburnt, and he's obviously almost becoming like obsessed and addicted to like the sunlight.
And that's how he dies, isn't it? He gets left in Icarus 1 and then like turns off the blinds, essentially, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, that is such a great scene, isn't it? Because it's kind of showing the danger and the absolute power. It's a great way of showing to us the power of the sun, right? In that he is like still however many tens of millions of miles away from it, and he's watching it through a filter that is like blocking out like 98% of it, and even so it's like almost too glaring. Doesn't the computer say if they kind of unfilter it by another 1%, it will like damage his retinas, right? So it's like the idea of the sheer power of this thing. It gets set up right at the very beginning, and I love that it's kind of there lingering throughout the film. This thing that is like way too powerful for us to be going near in any way. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think Alex Garland and Danny Boyle had like basically a creative falling out over this film, right? And in certain directions they wanted the story to go, and they sort of didn't work together again for another 18 years until 28 years later, and they kind of came back together and made up. Yeah. So this really kind of marked kind of going of separate ways, this movie, because they had so many creative differences behind the ideas behind this film and stuff. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting that you say, yeah, because I agree with what you say about this is kind of a turning point for Garland, actually, about his direct moving towards being a director. And I guess that break from Boyle kind of also sort of kickstarts that journey as well, doesn't it? But yeah, the obsession with like Searle's obsession is interesting, how because he's meant to be the psychologist of the crew, and yet he's kind of having this religious experience. And then that also foreshadows what happens with Pinbacker, because on the Icarus 1, like they all end up converting towards it, because they all kind of go onto the observation deck and open the blinds essentially and all get burned, which is why everything's filled with ash when they get on board there. So it's an interesting kind of parallel between these two characters, and that this observation deck with the visor for the sun almost becomes this kind of tabernacle, or this kind of place of worship. Yeah,
like an altar, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
And it's because it would have been designed as a way to help the crew just kind of, I mean, you know, to get to stay connected to their mission, I suppose, or even just to get sunlight, to get the vitamins from it, because they're on board this spaceship, and you know, because they've got the garden that creates the oxygen, so it's almost this attempt to bring the Earth with them and to bring all of these trappings of Earth along on the ship. But the closer they get to the sun, the more it kind of its presence kind of overtakes, especially Searle and Pinbacker.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is almost, again, that thing of like, you can plan, you know, all these things scientifically, but you can't account for like, what is it going to do to you to be so close to the sun? And so they're constantly getting thwarted just by their own humanity and the things that you can't control or foresee.
Well, yeah, because isn't Searle, you know, the character obsessed with the sun who's basically losing his mind? Isn't he like the therapist on board as well, right?
Absolutely,
so it's quite funny there that he seems the character at the beginning of the film most in need of a therapist, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I guess the whole thing is like it's the scientific approach doesn't seem, it just gets overwhelmed by, I guess, this religious experience, or this just cosmic experience.
Yeah, exactly. The part that science can't explain. Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, like watching the film again, and the fact that this is Danny Boyle and Alex Garland, but also Cillian Murphy. And Jim, the character of Jim in 28 Days Later, is just this one that's reacting. But then Kappa in Sunshine, he's almost like, it always seems like everything always seems to go back to him. Like you have this crew, but he's often the one, like when they first discover Icarus 1, they can't decide what to do. And then they go, well, okay, Kappa, you have to figure it out. And then later on when they're on Icarus 1 and they only have the one spacesuit, it's this whole thing. Again, he's constantly being almost like the chosen one.
He's so valuable, isn't he? Because he's a physicist, right? I think, and that essentially in this world trumps everything else, right? It trumps being the captain or being the strongest or being the whatever most capable. It's like he's the person we need to get to our destination point. All that matters really is the physicist delivers the payload, and that the physicist makes the decisions of what is best and what isn't, and it's interesting because even though he is like clearly so important in this, he also feels quite passive too, doesn't he? Like this, it's like these things that happen to him are sort of slightly thrust upon him, like even the fact that he has to make the decision, he doesn't really want to make the decision, they sort of force him into it. And Cillian Murphy's character Kappa is a bit like Jim still to me, in that he is this kind of vessel that is kind of moved by the other characters from one place to the next almost, There's
also the thing with Nader where Mace volunteers him and says, you should do it. So he is always just being thrust into these different situations. And so in contrast, you have, the rest of the crew. That was one big surprise that I had totally forgot watching it. It's just how stacked the cast is.
I couldn't believe it. I guess that's the thing, is that they're all way more well-known now than they were back then, right? But yeah, when you see this ship and it's like, holy shit, it's Chris Evans, Michelle Yeoh, Rose Byrne, right? Benedict Wong, Mark Strong, like all these incredible people that are now kind of all leads of their own blockbusters, essentially, right? That are all just playing like supporting players in this. Yeah.
And Hiroyuki Sanada is the other one, like, who's, in Shogun and everything. Like, it's wild to go back to these films and be like, oh yeah, all of these people are in this film when they were all just really kind of starting out.
Yeah.
Thinking about the different roles, I mean, we first see Kappa when he's having the fight with Mace. In fact, kind of one of the first times we see him. And so it's setting up this whole thing of like this crew, they've been together for a long time and things are probably starting to break down. So it is, I guess, kind of like 28 Days Later there. It's all about people just having to get along in this extreme situation. And that different characters are kind of, it's interesting to think about all the different approaches each of them have. Like I think about, like with Mace, played by Sevens, it's interesting that he and Kappa don't get along, but then later on he's the one where he's like, Kappa should have the suit, and so he seems very like almost very pragmatic about, and very kind of certain and rational. And then I was thinking, like, you've got someone like Cassie who's more like later on when they're talking about should we kill Trey, he's already suicidal, and she's the one who's like, I'm not going to agree to this.
Yes.
And then I also think Corazon, Michelle Yeoh's character, I kind of, one of my notes, I'm like, does she feel more for her plans than for the other people?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just seems like, you got all these different kind of viewpoints. So I just like when watching it again, like what were some of the crew dynamic? How was that playing out for you?
I think it's almost a bit like a zombie apocalypse film where you've got like the only people in this world are like a small handful of people that have been kind of lumped together in these kind of extreme circumstances. And in some ways they all represent the kind of different archetypes of humanity, right? Different types of personalities. Chris Evans is definitely, Mace is definitely the kind of really kind of quite cold, quite harsh. He's a bit of a dick at times, but he is also kind of technically right in a lot of the things he says. Like he's very cold and illogical, and he's like, we should just kill this guy because he's using up oxygen and he's suicidal anyway, or whatever. And then you've got Rose Byrne's character on the other end of that spectrum, who is kind of brings very much that kind of heart and humanity. So I think it's interesting from the way we're introduced to those boys fighting on the ship. It's kind of already straight away it's kind of juxtaposing the kind of pettiness, right, of human beings, really. Like these boys scrapping on this ship while they're actually in the middle of the most important mission in the history of humanity. Like the whole of the human race is in their hands, and they're like scrapping on a ship over something really petty, right, as well. So I think there is something really, really interesting about this group of characters in their sort of flaws, their weaknesses, what happens to poor Benedict Wong's character because he made that one human error, and the way he reacts to it, and what ultimately happens to him because of it, and whatever's going on with Searle throughout all of this. So you've got all of these different characters with their own sort of flaws and strengths and neuroses and anxieties, and all of them, as the closer and closer they get to the sun and the more and more time they spend isolated together, the more kind of intense and bubbling up all of these kind of issues are, I suppose, right? So it's kind of, it feels almost inevitable from the beginning that all of these people are going to end up dead by the end. I don't know. There's something about it that feels pretty inevitable to me, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think they all represent that response to extinction. Like I think they all know that they're not coming back from this. That there's no, and especially since the first mission failed and they have no idea. So there's this uncertainty, and I think that's one of the reasons why Searle gets kind of this spiritual obsession with the sun, because it's almost this reaction to trying to deal with the fact that they're probably all going to die. And then you have like Trey, Benedict Wong's character, like he has the survivor's guilt after his. What he does ends up with Kaneda getting killed, who's obviously the leader, and this he's all about sacrifice for the mission. And I think Mace, that pragmatism and stuff, like he is very mission focused. I think that's why a lot of his decisions of like, if there's only oxygen for 5 people, then we kill the 5th guy who's already probably going to kill himself anyway, because so it's like what do we need to do in order to push forward? And like his ultimate sacrifice is trying to get the computer back online and having to dive into the liquid nitrogen or whatever it is. Like, so he's for all of his bravado, he's very much like the mission first guy. And Corazon, Michelle Yeoh, I mean, she's all of this kind of, even though she brings up a lot of these problems about the oxygen and stuff, she's kind of represents this life kind of finding a way through, because when she gets killed by Pinbacker, she's left holding the little sprout that's come out of the burnt garden, kind of showing that even with all of this death and destruction, there is still this spark of life, and this is what kind of the mission's all about. So I think they all represent these kind of elements of reacting to kind of eventual death and destruction.
Funny what you were saying before. Like I noted down this line from Cassie where she says later on. She says it's different being afraid you won't get home and knowing that you won't. So I think it's also that whole thing of like, they know, maybe they think like, well, we're on this such an important, noble mission, and they know they're probably not going to survive it. But then when the reality actually sets in, because I think the film it's like 28 Days Later, it's so much about the psychology.
Yes.
It's all like, what does this do to you? Like, you're tasked with saving humanity, but what does that do to you?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Just the day-to-day. How do you, and you're all thrust together, and I also think of like when you said about them scrapping, there's a bit where they start kind of having a bit of a fight later on, and Corazon, Michelle Yeoh's character, just said, didn't expend so much oxygen.
Exactly. It's like, exactly. The utter pointlessness and pettiness of what they're doing, is hilarious. So I think it's really interesting the way that it kind of explores all of that with quite a light touch almost, And
then you have the later part of the film. So when they go to Icarus One, and it's really interesting that the sequence when they're on Icarus One and they keep having the flashes of faces, and the faces of the crew. And I think at the end of that, you see there's a photo of the crew all looking up, and there's also a photo of Icarus 2 crew, and kind of the same. So it almost seems like the whole thing of like they're just repeating exactly what happened with the first crew. So it's like.
Yeah, there's something a bit, speaking of Kubrick, there's something almost a bit The Shining about it, I think. Like, it's like, you are now the caretaker. It's like this, it's like a haunted house. It's like when they step on Icarus One, it's like a haunted ghost ship, isn't it? And that's when we really kind of move into more kind of gothic horror or something, I think. Yeah, and Danny Boyle having so much fun, I think, with the visuals in those moments. Yeah,
I definitely think that's a Boyle touch, the flashing of the faces.
Yeah, definitely.
Because he wants to bring home like that these were people, even though we haven't spent the whole movie with them. We need to know that there was this human tragedy that occurred.
Yes, for sure.
Garland wouldn't give a shit. Garland wouldn't give a shit about them at all.
Care about that. No way.
But there's also when they're on Icarus One and there's all the dust, and someone goes, "Oh yeah, 80% of dust is human skin." There's a whole thing throughout the film about dust and stardust. It says we're all stardust, but there's something about stardust and dust and
Definitely. Just that idea of like we're just returning to where we came from ultimately by going into the sun, essentially, right? Like we come from a star, we all come from stardust. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Kappa has those, or Kim and Cassie talk about their dreams, don't they, throughout the film of like falling into the sun and it being this kind of traumatic moment, and then it kind of like he has that. He does end up having the moment, but it's almost like it's a triumphant moment instead. So it's kind of like his worst fears are coming true, but it's also he's got to that place in his journey where it's actually this triumphant moment of self-sacrifice.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also the fact like the Icarus One crew, they're all like they're all through the sun. They literally turn to dust. They're all crumbling. So so it's interesting. So it almost seems like, and it does seem like with Pinbacker. And I think I did read that Danny Boyle was saying that Pinbacker is basically a fundamentalist. And so he's been almost radicalized by the sun.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And
I think it's something I don't think I got at all the first time I watched it, that this whole thing that Pinbacker is trying to stop the mission, because does he almost think that, I guess that if the sun is dying.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, if the sun wants to kill us, then we deserve to die.
Yeah, it's almost like it's God's will, it's the sun's will, it's God's will. It's kind of
the sun's turned its back on us.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Just kind of saying like, don't, this is what the world is making happen. We shouldn't be messing with it, kind of thing. Yeah.
Because I think at the point he says something about the mission. Does he even say something like the mission defies God? So he obviously keeps using this term God, and so. When he does end up, he's on Icarus 2 now. Someone was like, so is he dead or is he still alive? I guess this is where it doesn't get all very, I guess, unclear.
Yeah.
We don't really see Pinbacker. We see these images and distortions, and he's all very much light, which is a bit of a contrast because usually these villains or monsters are in darkness, but he's all flooded with light.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then he's on the ship, and it does almost become like a slasher where he's killing them one by one. So so how is this horror element working for you, or what do you make of what's going on? So you said the first time you watched it, that's what you were more into, or
yeah.
How do you find this turn?
I've got to say, when rewatching this film last night, it's probably, I think, the least successful part of the film. I don't think it's that good, the slasher horror. I think maybe it's trying to do too much, this movie, and I think by the time we get to that, I don't know, I feel like there were so many other bigger horrors to deal with that we almost didn't need the mad guy with the knife. And also, I started to, again, as much as I love Danny Boyle and his kind of amazing kind of visual style and the way he experiments with cameras and the form, I got a bit annoyed with the constant kind of distorting of the lens every time we saw this character, like it was just started to make me feel a bit nauseous. Like by the end, I was like, okay, chill out, because I kind of wanted to know what we were seeing and what was going on. And I started to slightly lose grip with it, but not in a compelling way, I think. So I think this is the weakest element of the film. I think it's the reason why maybe this film wasn't received as well as it could have been, because you're kind of left with this kind of slightly dodgy final act. I don't know. What did you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. I think I wasn't sure what I thought of it when I originally saw it. I thought it was, I liked that it was doing something a little bit different, but then watching it again, most recently, I do find it a bit kind of confusing and a bit underwhelming. And while I do appreciate like the way he looks a bit like Sam Neill at the end of Event Horizon, but with the shimmering light around him, and like they keep cutting away. It's almost like, and they're treating him like the sun, like you can't look directly at him. And I like that as an idea, but then it just becomes more frustrating the more the film goes on, because they keep cutting away from him, and it's like I just want to see what's going on and what's happening, and it's like it's constant desire to not do that. Becomes very frustrating for me, and I start to wonder, like, where are they? What's going on? Are they on Icarus 1 again? Are they not? Are they in the bomb? Like, I'm not quite sure exactly where they are and what's happening until eventually, like, it's all the film's over, and it's
it's disorientating, but in a bit of an unsatisfying way. It's disorientating at the very end there. Yeah.
Because I don't remember when I was watching the film and taking notes, I actually started to go, I don't know what to, because I thought, because something exploding, and I think it's Icarus 2, but I was thinking that was Icarus 1. And then also when he meets up with Cassie, also just the space becomes really immense. And so I was thinking, and that it did start to make me think, oh yeah, this has gone all very like Event Horizon, or maybe a bit Hellraiser, like, okay, so this is not really reality anymore. But then I was still confused because there was still the outside the ship of things exploding, and so I was just like, I am just confused. And like, I'm okay with not understanding. I mean, we're all big David Lynch fans. We're fine with that. But when you're just confused as to like, I don't know where things are happening and
yeah, exactly.
Just, if you're asking yourself those questions.
Exactly. It feels to me, I don't know, but it feels to me a little bit like Danny Boyle had to slightly fudge this together in the edit. I don't know. It almost feels like that they ran out of time or money for this final act or something. It just feels a little bit unsatisfying and kind of slightly cobbled together to me, I think. Whereas because the first sort of 3/4 of the film is so beautiful and immaculate and controlled, and they look amazing, and I think the pacing is really great, and there is so much horror there anyway, just in the sheer kind of situation that they're all in and the way that they're all starting to turn on each other and the paranoia is kicking in. It's almost like you didn't need this outside sort of slasher killer coming in, and like it could have just been a story about how they all destroyed each other almost, or something, I think, you know.
Well, you could have Searle be the pinbacker character, couldn't you, and have and have that they could get to the Icarus one and realize that they'd all destroyed each other, and that's what's going to happen to them, and yet even if knowing that, it still happens, you know. And have it be just or because I did find that there were like Cassie, all her characterization kind of falls by the wayside a little bit, and I feel like there was one too many characters to have anyone to have a moment, and if they'd had it just be that crew, and like you said, like everyone would have had more of an impact, I think.
I think so. Although I did. It was almost worth it for that really great moment where there was the reveal where the computer. What do they call the computer again? Oh, it's just Icarus, isn't it?
Yeah.
Icarus. But like Icarus says, there's a fifth person on the ship. Essentially, you know, that's a nice little moment. It's a nice reveal.
And it's funny because I think. Because you mentioned the falling out that must have happened. And I was reading that there was an original ending that was slightly different that Garland wrote. And there's an interview with Danny Boyle, and he does say, Alex and I fell out about the ending because Alex is a proper committed atheist. His ending of the film was they play chess as they hurtle into the face of the sun. And I was like, who's playing chess? And then whereas in mine, he was literally reaches out and touches something that you can call whatever you want to call it. And that, Garland said that I guess the sun is godlike, but not God. Garland also says that they felt differently. And he says that Danny Boyle believed that the crew actually were meeting God, but I didn't see this as a major problem because the difference in our approach wasn't in conflict with the way in which the story would be told. So it does seem that this ending was really where it was all falling apart, and I think you can just see it on screen.
Well, it's interesting. Danny Boyle does actually love an uplifting ending too, right? I think there is something quite uplifting, no matter how dark things get. You know, Train Spotting kind of ends with an element of hope, and 28 Days Later kind of ends with an element of hope as well. And I think Sunshine does, and it almost feels a little bit too cheesy, actually. And again, I wonder whether Alex Garland would have included this if he had directed it. But when we cut back to Earth and we see the family seeing the sun start to rise and shine a little brighter, I almost like, again, that feels more Danny Boyle to me than Alex Garland, I think, you know?
Yeah, the sun shining on the Australian tundra.
Yeah, that's right. You can see the
Sydney Opera House in the background. But I mean, that does complete sort of a lot of what the script is already doing about like this whole thing about sacrifice. And I was saying to Lindsay after we watched it, like every problem that they come across in the film, like with the journey, is a trolley problem. Every time it's like, well, if we do this, somebody's going to die. So what do we do? Do we save the mission or we save the person? And there's always all this back and forth about, well, if we do this, this is going to happen. And, so it's this whole, but the ultimate thing is that they're all being sacrificed in order to save the Earth. So I think it does bring it does bring it all back. But then having him do the little line about if you look up in the sky and see the sun shining a little bit brighter, it does kind of come across as a litlittle cheesy, maybe.
A little bit. Again, I like it's a nice ending, and I like that it kind of links back to that first message that he sent. But I don't know. The whole film, it feels almost just a little bit tacked on because the whole film isn't. We're not on Earth, and then to suddenly jump to Sydney, I don't know. It's almost like, did we need that? You know?
Yeah.
Given that this is also a sneaky Alex Garland double bill that we're talking about, thinking about these two films and now the films that Garland has made as director. Because one of the things, like just going back to 28 Days Later, when I was watching it for the screening that Liam put on, as they were going around on the road towards Manchester, I was thinking about Civil War.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And the whole thing. And Garland, I think he is obviously interested in the military because he made Warfare. And then I was thinking, especially with 28 years later, this idea of Britishness, and it was making me think of Men. And you kind of mentioned before, you feel like Sunshine is maybe almost more Garland. So, I mean, how do you see this as a Garland?
That's a really good question. Well? I almost don't know how to describe it, but it feels more Alex Garland somehow, doesn't it? I don't know if it's because of those big philosophical, existential, sort of scientific ideas at the nub of this, because I think, ultimately he is often dealing with that kind of like the big sci-fi ideas. Ex Machina is purely that. It's two men in a house talking about kind of big scientific philosophical ideas, and Annihilation is that almost dips into that kind of cosmic horror as well, where kind of reality begins to warp and bend, particularly towards the final act. Absolutely, Civil War. You could almost look at it as a zombie apocalypse film, as we're kind of journeying through this kind of war-torn America and coming across all these different, quite horrific pockets of people, at different points as well. There is something almost zombie apocalypse about it. And he seems quite obsessed with the idea of gender too, and toxic masculinity, and that is definitely in play in Ex Machina. Obviously, it's Men. I mean, the film is literally called Men, and the way it deals with it in that film as well. And I think we see a bit of that in Sunshine, and definitely in 28 Days Later as well. So I think there are definitely like a lot of seeds of ideas, and I think also Alex Garland's directing style. When he goes on to direct, he makes beautiful looking films, and I think they look like Sunshine. I think like they don't, and the sound of them, that Clint Mansell score as well, there's something about that reminds me of the way Alex Garland's movies sound, their soundtracks. He doesn't make films that look like 28 Days Later, but he makes films that look like Sunshine, I think. Do you know what I mean? Like almost a bit more kind of meditative or something, I think, And
it's funny, just as we were talking before about like when Sunshine first comes out, the kind of science fiction it was, like definitely now when we have kind of more of a serious science fiction film, it feels rare. But then I was thinking, like in 2007, it was probably quite rare then.
Very. Probably more rare, I reckon, then. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think audiences weren't up for a movie like this in 2007, and it was wasn't it a bit of a flop? I don't think it did very well.
So, yes.
Movie, right? And this was before the kind of boom of sort of Chris Nolan sci-fi movies, wasn't it? And it was, I think now, with stuff like Dune and with stuff like Interstellar and all these other movies, I think we're more likely to embrace these kinds of big philosophical sci-fi movies than we were even in 2007. I think this movie feels a little bit like it falls between two camps for audiences, maybe. Like it's not enough slasher horror to be like an Event Horizon type movie, and it's maybe a little bit too silly in places towards the end for people that want to just watch that kind of 2001 type experience. I don't know, but it kind of didn't quite satisfy either audience at the time in 2007.
Yeah, for sure. And I was thinking, like I was saying to Lindsay the other day, that I think Sunshine, without Sunshine, you don't get things like Interstellar or like Project Hail Mary, which, which just came out. But like in 2001, the whole idea of, they get this radio signal, which they're going to go follow out of just sheer curiosity. We're going to put this mission together to find out what's happening. But now we've got to kind of have these higher stakes, don't we? That these these existential threats to humanity in order for us to all sort of get behind a big project to send somebody into space in order to solve these issues. So I think there's this kind of change in the motivation for these characters, that space travel isn't just about let's go discover what's out there. We've got to have a clear mission in order to save the Earth, in order for this story to take place. Because like Project Hail Mary is all about the sun dying as well. It's like and like The Martian as well. I guess they're both based on Andy Weir books, but this whole thing of like having to use physics in order to solve all of these cascading problems. And that the threat itself being just the fact that we've transplanted ourselves from our comfy little Earth home into this hostile, indifferent void of space. So I think Sunshine kind of kicks off a lot of that, but sort of not seen at the time.
Well, I kind of think that it's more like when people, I guess now, you always have to justify all the money that you would spend to go into space.
Yeah.
So whereas in 1968, with 2001, that was the year before the moon landing. So everyone was like, yes, we've got to get out there, I guess, because of, we've got to get out there before the Russians do.
Yeah, exactly.
The Soviets do. Whereas now it's like, well, you've got to have a reason to go out there.
Well, they're going back to the moon now because of China. So we've got the old the rivalries happening again.
Space race back. Yeah.
But then, so next year is the 20th anniversary of this film. I mean, do you think it might get reclaimed, or do you have a sense that people are starting to re-examine the film?
Yeah, I think no. I mean, I don't know. From my own little bubble of when I posted on Instagram last night that I was watching this, I got a load of replies from people saying, God, I love this film. It's underrated. That I'm always telling people they should watch this and stuff like that. I think there are a certain amount of people that are kind of really, really champion this movie. And I think maybe, I think it will maybe. It does feel like a kind of forgotten movie in Danny Boyle's filmography. He had Slumdog Millionaire the year after this, didn't he? And I feel like this is the movie that he has a few of these, like Millions and A Life Less Ordinary, the ones that kind of fall between the big ones that he does. And this was definitely one of those. But maybe because now Alex Garland is more of a name, and because of the 28 Years Later movies, and maybe people are going to rediscover, previous Danny Boyle, Alex Garland kind of collaborations. I don't know. Or maybe it's just people of our generation that are talking it up more. But I think there is still a bit of love for this movie. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few kind of 20th anniversary screenings or think pieces on it, or this movie is actually way better than you remember kind of pieces next year pop up. I wouldn't be surprised. And it does have a huge amount to recommend it, I think. I think it is a really impressive piece of work and a great cast too. So yeah.
Actually, I do remember. I remember now. I was listening to the Script Apart podcast when they interviewed Alex Garland for, I think it was for Civil War, and they talked about Sunshine. I'm only just remembering this now, weirdly. They actually had planned a trilogy of films.
Oh, wow.
And it was like Sunshine and then like Moonshine and then like Earthshine or something like that. Like they actually had this whole, they obviously thought it was going to be a massive hit and that they were going to go on to make sequels, which is, kind of wild considering now that they're trying to get a 28 years later trilogy up and running.
Yeah. My God, that's really interesting, isn't it? And I mean, that's the thing I like. I think these two they're just burst, and especially Alex Garland, is just bursting with ideas all the time, right? And he loves writing. I think he got a bit sick of filmmaking, actually directing, which is a shame because he's really good at it. But whenever I've interviewed him, he's kind of always said like, "Oh, I'm done with this." Like I interviewed him after Men, and he was like, "I'm not doing this anymore." Then I interviewed him after Civil War, and he said the same thing. And when I interviewed him and Danny for 28 Years Later last year, he was saying what a relief it was just to be the writer and just to hand the script over to Danny Boyle. So I think Alex Garland finds the actual filmmaking process quite exhausting, but he loves writing and he's got so many ideas. I think. Yeah.
Well, isn't he doing the Elden Ring movie now?
Yeah, he is. I know exactly. He keeps saying he's quit and then he's coming back with some other amazing project. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you were telling me about Elden Ring, and I'm like, this doesn't seem like a little small production.
No,
like, this is going to have to be huge. What is he doing?
I know.
A massive
glutton for punishment. He loves it.
Yeah, I think secretly he must do. You just won't admit it. All right. I think that we've covered a lot.
Nice.
So, Mike, just tell us, I know you don't just have the Evolution of Horror podcast, you have the Evolution of Horror network. So can you just tell us a bit about like all the kind of podcasts and things that you're doing?
Yeah, so I guess like I've kind of branched out into doing a few different podcasts now, all dealing with similar kind of areas, which is kind of looking at sort of film and TV history, I suppose, kind of like old franchises or TV shows or kind of subgenres or studios that have kind of like, you know, I guess kind of put us in a very specific time and place. So I've got a Twin Peaks podcast that kind of goes through all of the Twin Peaks episodes from beginning to end, including the film, including the books, with Stacey Ponder called The Detective and the Log Lady. I've got a podcast that kind of goes through all of the Carry On movies, these kind of weird, kind of forgotten comedy movies, the British comedies from the 60s and 70s. It's been really fun to do.
What is that like? I don't think I've ever really seen a full Carry On movie.
No, I mean, why would you, I suppose? Like, they're sort of grow up in Britain. I think, you know, you'll encounter them as a kid, but they've kind of been forgotten and slightly cancelled over the last 20 years or so as well. And so it's, you know, they're considered very dated. They're considered very problematic in a lot of ways. And I think that in itself has been really fun. So me and Susan Kalman, who is a comedian, we kind of have gone through all of them in order. There are 30 films made across 20 years, from 1958 to 1978. Like really kind of tracking a massive period of change in culture and in comedy and everything. And so it's been really fun just as like a time capsule to kind of look at those films in the context of Britain in the 1950s, 60s and 70s and the way it changed, really. So it's been really fun. But yeah, again, like niche, I suppose. And I've also got a Hammer horror podcast that I don't present. It's hosted by Becky Dark and Kevin Lyons, where they're going through all of Hammer Horror's back catalogue from beginning to end as well. So
I love that part. I'm listening. I love it.
Good, right? Yeah. It's so good. They're an amazing team, those two. And oh my God, there are so many films. I mean, like that. I think we're about 30 films in out of about 70. So we're not even halfway through yet. So there's a lot to come. Yeah.
No, it's really good.
All of those and then the Evolution of Horror podcast as well. All of them you can find wherever you get your podcast.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And you have the next season of Evolution of Horror. Have you announced?
I have. Yeah, I have. So I dropped a trailer for it online and it's going to be called Childhood Nightmares. And it's going to be basically all about the kind of the horrors of childhood, essentially. So I'll be covering everything from kind of like creepy kids like The Bad Seed and Village of the Damned and that kind of stuff, to sort of clowns and dolls and ventriloquist dummies. You know, because I've not covered anything like that yet, like It, Dolly Dearest and Annabelle and Chucky even, all of that kind of stuff. But then also within that kind of movies about movies made for kids too that kind of traumatized us as children. So like I'll throw in a bit of kind of Willy Wonka and Labyrinth and Dark Crystal and that kind of stuff as well. So
you need to do Return to Oz, because that is the one film as a child.
Yeah.
It's horrific.
How did they think that was...
How do they think that was okay, right?
So let's get the editor of Apocalypse Now to direct the Wizard of Oz sequel.
Insane. Absolutely insane. Yeah, I know. So I think it's going to be really fun. I'm really excited to delve into that. And it will be a nice mix of different types of movies, I think, as well. So yeah.
So just we need to put a word in there first. Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is such a...
Oh, yeah.
I love that film so much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That'll be in there for sure. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun. I loved it.
SciFrights is hosted, produced and edited by Liam Dunn and Lindsay Hallam.
Theme music by Damo Alexander and Rosie Gilbey.
Artwork by Millie Hallam.
And please follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, Bluesky, YouTube and Letterboxd.
And please rate and review our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and share it with someone you know. It really does help.